Poverty, A Threat to a Life Worth Living by Claire Mackin and Samantha Yates. Through this project, we look to define poverty, show how poverty is currently measured in the United States, and how we believe poverty should be measured. Our primary goal is to present poverty in a way that encapsulates the true societal issues with which we are concerned.
We will start with our basic definition of poverty. Poverty is a state of being in which an individual is deprived of the combined capabilities to live a dignified life. But what does this really mean? This means that poverty threatens our ability to have the basic internal and societal freedoms that are required for a life worth living. Some of these basic freedoms include the ability to obtain an education, live in a safe environment, participate in political debate, and involve themselves in society without shame or judgment. While most people believe that poverty equates to economic deprivation, income doesn't account for many of these essential freedoms. Nevertheless, income continues to be the primary way the government measures poverty within the United States.
The official poverty measure, or OPM, and the supplemental poverty measure, or SPM, are the two measurements currently used today to measure poverty. The OPM is the official measurement used by the United States government, whereas the SPM is used to supplement it. Both measurements look at an individual's economic resources, while the SPM improves areas of the OPM to help better measure poverty. The OPM was developed in the early 1960s and has not been accurately updated for the changing times. The SPM, however, is updated every 5 years. By revisiting the SPM more frequently, policymakers are more easily able to assess the current poverty situation. While family structures have changed a lot since the 1960s and are no longer the simple traditional family, the OPM continues to define a family unit as all individuals living together who are related by birth, marriage, or adoption. The SPM has a much more inclusive definition of family. All individuals who live at the same address, and any foster children, and any cohabitors and their children. The OPM does not take into account key government policies including in-kind benefits and near-cash benefits that assist poor families and can help increase a family's disposable income, whereas the SPM does. In addition, the OPM does not consider non-discretionary costs, including transportation to work, childcare, and medical care costs. The SPM, however, measures these non-discretionary costs because policymakers recognize that they can significantly impact an individual's disposable income and therefore his or her state of poverty. While geographical differences can have a huge impact on the standard of living, the OPM does not include these differences. The SPM considers the costs an individual may face depending on where they live. Because the SPM includes more of these factors that have immediate impacts on an individual's economic resources, the SPM provides a more accurate depiction of poverty. We do want to recognize the SPM is not able to fix a major disadvantage of the OPM. Both measures focus solely on income and economic resources of an individual.
While the SPM certainly does a better job in outlining the current economic state of a family for reasons we have already mentioned, both the OPM and the SPM miss the underlying motivation for our concern for those in poverty. At the end of the day, we are not concerned with the number of dollar bills a family is earning, but rather the overall well-being and dignity of each individual in that family. Therefore, we need a better way of defining and measuring poverty that more closely resembles these core values. This is where Amartya comes in. Amartya came up with two new ways of measuring poverty, one being to measure the capabilities of an individual and the other being to measure the functionings of an individual. Sen defines capability as an individual's ability to achieve various valuable functionings as a part of living. Functionings, on the other hand, are the various things that he or she decides to do or be in leading a life. What does this actually mean? In other words, functionings are the current beings and doings of an individual, while capability is the potential that an individual has to fulfill certain beings and doings. So is it better to rely on capabilities or functionings when identifying and measuring poverty? Take the example of a child who hasn't eaten in 2 days because her mother could not afford to buy her food. In this case, the child is lacking both capabilities, the capability to eat an adequate and healthy diet, and functionings, the actual act of eating an adequate and healthy diet. Both a measure of the child's capability and a measure for functionings give accurate representations of whether this child is in poverty. Now, take the example of a monk who has given a vow to fast, yet still has enough money and food availability for proper nutrition. In this case, the monk has the capability to eat, it has not fulfilled that functioning. Therefore, a measure of the monk's functionings is not an accurate enough representation of whether the monk is in poverty. Furthermore, if one decided proper nutrition to be a basic human right required to live a dignified lifestyle, then the government would have the obligation to force feed anyone lacking in nutrition in an effort to respect their physical well-being. In the case of the monk, the government would then be taking away his basic human right to fast. As a result, it would be more accurate to label the capability of proper nutrition as a basic human right required to live a dignified human life. Capability, as opposed to the actual act of fulfilling that capability, is what provides us with choices that allow us to live a substantial lifestyle.
So we've already determined that the capability approach is a more accurate way to measure levels of poverty in the United States. Therefore, what are the basic capabilities that an individual needs to fulfill in order to live a life of human dignity? Martha Nussbaum came up with 10 central capabilities that thoroughly portray what it means to live a life of human dignity. Some capabilities we want to highlight include living in good health, securing oneself against violent outside threats, having the time and resources for play, having normal emotional connections with other beings, engaging in imaginative and critical thinking, and participating in political decisions. It is important to reemphasize here that an individual can have any of these capabilities without taking advantage of them, as can be seen with the fasting monk. Furthermore, Nussbaum states that all 10 capabilities are equally important towards maintaining a proper, dignified life, and if one had to choose between two, they would be making a tragic choice. A choice in which any outcome would result in restriction on that individual's freedom, and therefore a violation of that individual's human dignity. Combined capabilities or substantial freedoms are an individual's ticket towards protecting their innate human dignity. Combined capabilities consist of an individual's internal capabilities plus that individual's external freedoms. For example, in order to land a job, one would have to have the proper education and training for that job position, as well as the societal freedom to work. We focus on this point last because it is important to note that an individual may look like they have a capability when they really do not. A substantial freedom means that there is nothing, societal or internal, standing in the way of an individual pursuing that freedom. Even if someone has enough money, has enough education, or is surrounded by enough resources to the point where it looks like they have all their necessary capabilities, that does not mean they do. For this reason, neither total income, gross annual net income, a measurement of an individual's functionings, or even a quick glance at an individual's societal capabilities tells the full story.
The last question would therefore be, how do we measure the substantial or combined capabilities of every individual living within the United States? To try to measure all of the factors that may impact an individual's 10 capabilities would be a tedious and impractical way of approaching a new poverty measurement. Additionally, simply lacking in one of the capabilities might not be reason enough to label that individual as impoverished. For example, say a man has several $1,000,000 in his bank account, has access to good medical care, lives in a good neighborhood, and is able to send his children through a good school system. However, he cannot connect emotionally with his friends, wife, and children any longer because he is rarely at home and is always consumed with work. We wouldn't consider him impoverished, even though he is lacking one of Nussbaum's 10 essential capabilities. Finally, it would be difficult to measure the internal capabilities that each individual develops through infancy and childhood. While these are key for an individual to have substantial freedoms, the best way that we would be able to measure poverty is by examining the external or societal capabilities of each individual. We need to have some concrete way of measuring poverty in the United States, and we need to set a realistic goal for our measurement. In order to measure external capabilities, we will start out by taking the SPM and tweaking it to include Nussbaum's essential capabilities. The SPM already provides a more accurate representation than the OPM of an individual's economic resources required for basic needs. Furthermore, it is evident that within our society today, income is a major factor leading to an individual's ability to obtain basic capabilities. The more income an individual has, the more likely they will be able to obtain good health, education, shelter, nice clothing, and ultimately respect from their community. However, income still does not account for many other capabilities such as play, bodily integrity, and sense, imagination, and thought, among others. In order to incorporate all of the capabilities that the SPM does not account for, we will have to look at the community in which an individual lives and ask ourselves if it accounts for these capabilities. Is there a decent education system? Is it a safe walk for the children? Is there a community park and other recreational activities available? Is there an adequate healthcare provider nearby? Does the individual live in a clean neighborhood, or is he or she living next to a dump? We understand that finding a numerical value to define each individual's capability is near impossible, but we believe that these questions can help to identify some of the missing capabilities in different communities. When taking into account these availabilities, along with SPM's measure of income, we would be able to establish a measure that more accurately represents poverty levels in the United States. Ultimately, this new measure takes a more realistic approach while still allowing us to keep in mind the underlying motivation for our concern for poverty.